Well, when Reform UK leader Nigel Farage triggered a by-election for his own parliamentary seat, all the main political parties declined to take part, calling it a stunt. But one man who's no stranger to political stunts has taken full advantage. Comedian Jonathan Harvey is running against Farage as Count Binface, a self-described intergalactic space warrior whose policies include building at least one affordable house and capping the price of croissants. Here to tell us more is Dr Andy Mycock. He's a political scientist and Chief Policy Fellow at the University of Leeds. Dr Mycock, thanks very much for your time this evening. Count Binface has popped up at UK elections for a number of years now. What do we know about him?
Well, Count Binface, well, he was originally Lord Buckethead until he came into some copyright issues, has been competing particularly with high-profile by-elections for about a decade now. And in many ways, what he's trying to do is, connect with that long tradition of satirising British politics, which is not too difficult to do at the moment. And what he's trying to do is draw attention to, well, maybe some of the less appealing elements of electoral politics, and also the way in which particularly politicians design election manifestos, which often don't bear up to scrutiny or the truth.
We've seen a lot of joke candidates take part in UK elections in the past, as you mentioned. How did that become a thing in Britain?
I think you can trace it back at least to the 1960s and the Profumo affair. We saw David Such, who was a popular pop musician at the time, stand as screaming Lord Such, and he was the first real celebrity figure to try and sort of draw attention to some of the less appealing elements of politics. And since then, we've seen, quite frequently, we've seen these comedy figures come up and start to contend. So we've had Elmo out of the Muppets, Mr. Blobby, who's a very popular TV cartoon figure in the UK. And often people dressed as all array of different kinds of animals, often trying to bring attention to single issue causes rather than trying to satirize politics more widely. Although I think one of the things that often comes up is that there is this concern that in the UK there is a none of the above, there's no none of the above option on our ballot papers. And so in many ways, voting for these kind of figures is a way of saying none of the above.
Wow. Has Count Binface himself always been solely about poking fun at Britain's political circles and the political establishment, or has he actually made a point with some of the satirical policies that he's announced over the years?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. He's an interesting mix. So quite often there are some, quite humorous policies in there, like nationalising the singer Adele. But in there, he's also been very supportive of reforming the House of Lords and indeed abolishing the House of Lords in its current context, of lowering the voting age to 16, and looking at that way in which, we may be able to reform British electoral practice. So what you get is this mix of practical solutions about how to reform democracy in the country and some less serious policies. As you noted, keeping the price of a croissant to £1 is a very popular idea in the UK.
Well, that's something I can get behind as well. What's his strategy going forward, though? Both politicians and comedians always need fresh material, especially on a weeks-long campaign like this. Will he just peddle the same jokes over and over again, or do you see him changing things up a bit?
Well, therein is the question, and it depends really to what extent that Nigel Farage seeks to engage with Count Binface. In some senses, Count Binface doesn't need to do much campaigning because there is such a media frenzy around him at the moment that I think that people are less focused on his policies and more on what he stands for in terms of this framing of the Clacton by-election by Nigel Farage as the people versus the establishment. Well, if Count Binface is the establishment, then one suspects that, Nigel Farage is going to struggle to land many blows on him. So I suspect that what you will find is that he will be trying to stalk Nigel Farage. If we see Nigel Farage out in the campaign stoop, that we will see Count Binface turning up in less opportune moments. But the reality is that in many ways, this is going to be an interesting feature, both in terms of the idea, will people buy into the notion of this people versus the establishment framing of the by-election, but also will people bother to vote? Because there is the idea that if Nigel Farage is found guilty of some of the Parliamentary Commission inquiries into his political donations, that there's going to have to be a second by-election shortly afterwards. So I'm not quite so sure in August that the Brits are going to be too keen to go out there and think too hard about politics whilst they're on the summer holidays.
What does Count Binface's support base look like in Clacton by Sea? Is there a support base there for him?
Well, if you look at his electoral performances in the past, with the exception of quite a strong showing in the London mayor elections of 2024, he's not really done particularly well. You're looking at votes in the hundreds, in the low hundreds at that. And yet, with no major political parties standing in the by-election except for Reform UK, there is a high likelihood that there's going to be a consensus for the voters of all the other parties that are going to get behind Binface. And if you look at past by-elections and general elections in the Clacton, it could be very close, much closer than I think Nigel Farage would have first thought when he announced the by-election last week.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. What's your prediction? How well do you think he'll do on the day?
Do you know, I think he might just nick it. I think that two things are there. One is that we're going to get a low turnout anyway, because a lot of people, they're not really interested in the by-election, and they're not particularly bought by the idea that Nigel Farage is doing it for, legitimate reasons. And yet there is a highly motivated satirical streak within the British electorate that if they think that this is a way in which they can maybe dim the star of Nigel Farage, then they're going to vote Binface. So I have a strong feeling that, we might be in for a real political earthquake. The interesting question will be then, though, will he sit in our House of Parliament as Binface? And we have got a precedent here. In 2010, a monkey stood for the mayor of Hartlepool, Angus the monkey. And the next day he took his monkey suit off, and performed as mayor for 5 years.
No, well, I mean, yeah, so he's got quite a bit to live up to there. Political scientist Dr Andy Mycock, we really appreciate your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.